Okay, let's get into what is just, the ultimate paradox in ancient history.
It really is.
We're talking about this elite group of soldiers,
Right.
right? They're hired specifically to protect the Roman emperor,
His personal bodyguards?
and yet they end up being the single biggest threat to his life. We are talking, of course, about the Praetorian Guard.
And that paradox, that's their whole story. To really get how powerful and how dangerous they were, you have to go back to the beginning.
Right.
Because they didn't start out as this big single fort inside Rome. They started as these small, highly specialized groups.
Out on the battlefield.
Exactly. Protecting Roman generals during huge military campaigns. These were the best of the best, handpicked for their bravery and their absolute loyalty to their commander.
But then everything changes.
Yeah.
The Roman Republic collapses, becomes a Roman Empire, and all the rules are thrown out. And the first emperor, Augustus, he realizes he needs protection. But more than that, he needs control. So he takes these scattered Praetorian units and, he merges them into this one massive permanent force.
And here's the key move.
This is the history-altering part. He stations them inside the city of Rome itself. This was a direct, calculated move to make sure their loyalty was always on him.
And that decision instantly gave them a kind of political leverage that no other military unit had. It basically created a structural fault line in the entire empire from day one.
A fault line, that's a good way to put it. Because once they're based in the capital, their status is just worlds apart from the regular Roman legionary.
Oh, it's not even comparable. Think about it. You have the regular legionaries stuck for decades on the cold, dangerous borders of the empire.
Fighting in places like Britain or Germany.
Right. And meanwhile, the Praetorians are living this, luxurious life in the very heart of civilization.
It was probably the best job you could get in the entire Roman world. And let's talk about the money, because that's really what drove everything.
It always comes down to the money.
Their basic pay was triple what a normal legionary made. Triple. And that's just the start.
Right.
They served for a much shorter time, 16 years instead of 25. So they get to retire almost a decade earlier.
And when they did retire, they walked away with this huge cash payout. A lump sum big enough to buy a nice plot of land and just, live comfortably.
But the real kicker, the thing that became institutionalized bribery, was the donativum.
Yeah, that's the key term here.
This wasn't a regular paycheck. It was this huge mandatory cash bonus. Every single time a new emperor took power.
Whether he inherited it or, took it.
Right, didn't matter. He had to immediately give a massive donativum to the entire guard. It was basically the emperor's down payment to buy their support.
And without it, his reign probably wouldn't last the week.
So it wasn't just about the money attracting soldiers, was it? It was a social thing, too.
Absolutely. Serving in the guard was this express route to moving up in the world. You had these wealthy, well-connected young men who wanted to join because it was a direct path to political influence in the capital.
But that created this massive vulnerability, didn't it? Their
Yeah.
loyalty could just shift on a dime to whoever was willing to pay them the most.
Exactly. And that level of privilege created this intense, deep resentment among the regular army.
The legionaries.
Yeah, guys doing the hard work, expanding the empire far from Rome. They saw the Praetorians as these spoiled, pampered soldiers getting triple the pay for half the risk.
And that friction between the two groups becomes really important later on.
Mm-hmm.
And to really see how separate they were, you just had to look at their home base, the Castra Praetoria.
Which was this imposing structure just outside the old city limits, close enough to be a threat, but just far enough away to not technically break the old rules about armies in the city.
It wasn't just a camp, it was a fortress.
A colossal stone fortress. It had high, thick walls, battle towers. It looked like a fort you'd find on the frontier. The walls were so massive you could see them from the city.
Wow.
And it kind of reinforced their whole status as this group that was totally separate from the regular Roman people.
And inside those walls, they were training constantly.
Yeah.
But it was a different kind of training, right?
Totally different. Not siege warfare. They practiced things like riot control, palace defense, close quarters protection.
Their duties were very visible. They're patrolling the palace, guarding the emperor, keeping order at big public events.
And living right there in the capital meant they were always right next to the levers of political power. They heard everything.
Their special status was even reflected in what they wore, in their gear.
Oh, absolutely. The legions had practical standard-issue armor. The Praetorians, their equipment was higher quality and way more decorated.
So what did that look like?
Well, their shields, for instance, were often these round or oval shapes decorated with symbols like stars and the moon. It made them stand out instantly.
And the helmets.
Their helmets often had these impressive crests, made of bright horsehair or feathers. It was all designed to look intimidating and ceremonial.
What's really interesting to me, though, is their city uniform.
Mm-hmm.
When they were on duty in Rome, they would often skip the heavy metal armor and just wear these simple but very high-quality tunics.
It was a smart political move. It made them look less aggressive to the public.
But you can bet they were never unarmed.
Hmm.
They always had their swords, and these are the best swords money could buy.
Right. But if you look past all the gear and the pay, the real source of their power was their main job.
They were the personal bodyguards.
For the emperor and his immediate family, they were in the most private rooms of the palace. They went everywhere with him, even to the battlefield as his last line of defense.
That constant closeness. That must have changed everything.
It did.
Because they were always there, they saw and heard it all. The backroom deals, the family secrets, the day-to-day running of the government. That kind of access isn't just military strength. It's political intelligence.
And that's the pivot. They started as protectors, and they quickly became political players. The key fact is they were the only large armed military force inside the city.
Which gave them the ultimate leverage.
The ultimate. So when an emperor died, or more often was removed, they were the ones who stepped in and decided who was next. That's why history calls them the Kingmakers.
So when they were choosing a new emperor, was it ever about who would be best for Rome? Or was it just...
It was almost always purely about money. They supported the candidate who promised them the biggest donativum, the most gold, and guaranteed their special status. The stability of the government was a distant second to their own financial security.
And the terrifying flip side of that is if they can make a king.
They can unmake one just as easily.
They must have terrorized the emperors.
Oh, they did. They frequently overthrew or just executed emperors they didn't like, which usually meant emperors who couldn't or wouldn't pay them enough. Many emperors lived in constant fear, knowing their life depended on keeping their own bodyguards happy.
I think we have to talk about the assassination of Caligula. That's probably the most famous example of their power.
It's the perfect example. Caligula was a tyrant, he was erratic, and he made the huge mistake of publicly insulting his own Praetorian officers.
A very bad idea.
A fatal mistake. A conspiracy formed among his own officers led by a guy named Cassius Chaerea.
And they pulled it off in this shockingly brutal way. During a public event, Caligula was walking through this narrow, secluded hallway.
And Chaerea and his men just cornered him. They stabbed him repeatedly and left him there. A swift, terrifying internal coup.
The chaos that followed really shows how fragile the whole system was.
Complete chaos. Caligula's dead, and the Praetorians realize they've just created a power vacuum. They need a new emperor, fast.
So they're running through the palace.
And they find Caligula's uncle, Claudius, literally hiding behind a curtain, terrified he's going to be next. They drag him out, and right there on the spot, they declare him the new emperor. And Claudius, who was no fool, immediately paid them a colossal donativum, the biggest one yet, to guarantee he'd survive the day.
But even that wasn't their low point. The most shocking moment, the one that showed their greed had completely taken over, came later.
After they murdered another emperor, Pertinax.
Yes, in 193 AD. This time they didn't just pick a new ruler, they put the throne of the Roman Empire up for auction.
It's almost hard to believe, isn't it? They stood on the walls of their own fortress and shouted down to two wealthy senators who were standing outside.
Literally bidding against each other for the empire.
And one of them, Didius Julianus, won. Not because he was a great general or a brilliant politician, but because he promised an astronomical amount of gold to every single soldier.
That act just proved to the whole world that they cared more about their own wallets than the stability of the state.
And it immediately triggered a massive destructive civil war.
So who was in charge of this? This incredibly powerful and volatile group.
That would be the Praetorian prefect. This was arguably the most powerful job in Rome outside of being the emperor himself. He was responsible for the guards' discipline, but also for the security of the entire city.
And the prefect's power just grew over time, didn't it?
It expanded massively. They started as military commanders, but They slowly took on political and legal duties. They started acting as judges in major cases.
So one guy's in charge of the military enforcement and the judicial system?
Exactly. It's a dangerous amount of power. And some of them, like Sejanus, under the Emperor Tiberius, got so ambitious they tried to seize the throne for themselves.
So being the prefect was a balancing act. You had to be skilled, but not too skilled, or the emperor would see you as a threat.
A very dangerous balancing act. Emperors often executed ambitious prefects out of fear.
But the guard's power couldn't last forever.
No, things started to change. The empire began facing more and more threats on its borders, so emperors started spending more time with the regular armies on the front lines.
And they started forming new bodyguard units, right? Smaller, more loyal ones made up of soldiers from far-off provinces.
Guys from Germania or the Balkans, people with no connection to the politics of Rome. The Praetorians, who had been involved in so many plots and assassinations, just couldn't be trusted anymore.
So when the center of power moved away from the city of Rome,
The Praetorians lost their leverage. Their whole power was based on being the only army near the emperor. When that was no longer true, their power vanished.
and the final nail in the coffin comes from Emperor Constantine the Great.
Right. Constantine knew that if he wanted a stable empire, this whole institution had to be destroyed.
So the guards made their last stand, fighting for Constantine's rival, Maxentius, at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge.
And to their credit, they fought with incredible ferocity. They were Maxentius's best troops. But Constantine's tactics won the day, and the Praetorian Guard was totally defeated.
And Constantine didn't just defeat them, he erased them.
He did. In this huge symbolic act, he ordered the walls of the Castra Praetoria, that fortress that had symbolized their power for centuries, to be torn down to the foundations.
And the surviving soldiers?
They were stripped of their status and sent to serve in regular army units on the most distant, miserable borders of the empire. Exactly the fate they had spent their entire careers avoiding. After 300 years of power, the organization was just gone.
It's one of history's clearest lessons, I think, about what happens when you give a small military group too much political power.
It's a profound danger. They basically privatized the government, and their loyalty was always to the highest bidder, not the state.
And that idea still lives on. The term Praetorian is still used today to describe a group that's fiercely, sometimes ruthlessly, loyal to a single leader.
They went from being the emperor's protectors to being the greatest threat he faced. It just proves that unchecked power will always eventually serve itself.
A truly incredible story about the dynamics of power. Good luck with your studies.